Chapter 4, The Fleet Divides. Admiral Catherine Harrison stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching her tactical displays with the practiced eye of an officer who had spent 30 years reading the ebb and flow of space battles. But this wasn't a battle against external enemies, this was the Imperial Navy tearing itself apart. "Status report," she called out to her operations officer. 17 battle groups have declared for the Republic, Commander Williams replied. 23 have sided with Kronos. The remainder are either uncommitted or their loyalties are unclear. Catherine studied the deployment patterns on the strategic display. Kronos controlled most of the core systems and had positioned his forces to protect the Omega Cannon construction site. The Loyalist fleets were scattered throughout the Outer Rim, trying to establish defensive perimeters around worlds that had refused to acknowledge the Admiral's authority. "Ma'am," the communications officer announced, "incoming transmission from the courier ship Freedom's Edge. General McLean and his team are requesting permission to come aboard." "Granted. Have them escorted to the war room the moment they dock." Catherine felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. Joseph McLean was one of the finest tactical minds in the Imperial military, and she would need every advantage she could get in the coming battle. But more than that, he was one of the few people she trusted completely in a galaxy where loyalties had become uncertain. 20 minutes later, Joseph entered the war room looking haggard but determined. Behind him came Lieutenant Commander Chen and a man Catherine recognized as Commander David Kane, one of the military's most effective special operations officers. "Joseph," Catherine said, rising from her chair. "Thank God you're alive." "Good to see you too, Catherine. Though I wish it were under better circumstances." Catherine gestured to the holographic display dominating the center of the room. It showed the current disposition of all known Imperial forces, color-coded by loyalty and updated in real time by the fleet's intelligence network. "As you can see, we have a problem," Catherine said. "Kronos controls approximately 60% of the Imperial Navy, including most of the heavy battle cruisers and all of the siege platforms." Joseph studied the display, his expression growing more grim by the moment. "What about the planetary defense forces?" "Mixed. The core worlds are mostly loyal to Kronos, but the Outer Rim is standing with us. The problem is, the Outer Rim worlds don't have the industrial capacity to sustain a prolonged war." Kane stepped forward, activating a secondary display that showed the Omega Cannon construction site. "Admiral, based on our intelligence gathering, the super weapon will be operational within 72 hours. Once Kronos has the ability to destroy planets at will." "The war is over," Catherine finished. "Yes, I've reached the same conclusion. Which means we have 3 days to either destroy the weapon or find a way to neutralize it." "About that," Joseph said. "We've learned that the weapon's control systems are biologically integrated with Kronos himself. Even if we capture the Omega Cannon, we can't operate it without him." Catherine felt her hopes dim. She had been counting on the possibility of capturing the weapon and turning it against Kronos' forces. Without that option, their tactical situation became much more difficult. "However," Chen added, "we did obtain detailed technical specifications during our infiltration. Our analysis suggests that while the weapon is incredibly powerful, it has significant limitations." Chen activated another display, this one showing the internal structure of the Omega Cannon. "The weapon requires an enormous amount of energy to function, more than can be generated by conventional fusion reactors. Instead, it draws power directly from subspace using a quantum tap system." Catherine frowned. "Quantum tap technology is still theoretical." "Not anymore," Kane said grimly. "Kronos has been working with some very advanced theoretical physicists. The power system is functional, but it's also incredibly unstable. The quantum tap has to be recalibrated after every shot, and the recalibration process takes approximately 6 hours. 6 hours, Catherine mused. So he can only fire the weapon 4 times per day, maximum. Less than that if he wants to maintain accuracy, Chen confirmed. The targeting systems also require extensive preparation, orbital mechanics calculations, gravitational adjustment, stellar interference patterns. A precision shot at an inhabited world would require at least 12 hours of preparation. Joseph looked thoughtful. So his threat to destroy multiple worlds in rapid succession is a bluff. Partially, Kane agreed. He could certainly destroy several worlds over the course of a week, but not the massive simultaneous bombardment he's implied. Catherine felt a spark of hope. If Kronos' weapon had significant limitations, that opened up tactical possibilities. But they still had the fundamental problem of how to neutralize a super weapon protected by the majority of the Imperial fleet. "Ma'am," the communications officer called from the bridge, "priority transmission from Acting Emperor Vasquez." Elena's image appeared on the main screen, transmitted from the bridge of the cruiser Defiant. She looked tired but determined, and Catherine was relieved to see that the acting head of government had survived the chaos on Celestia Prime. "Admiral Harrison, General McLean," Elena said, "I'm glad to see you're both safe. What's our strategic situation?" Catherine quickly summarized the fleet dispositions and the intelligence about the Omega cannon's limitations. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. 72 hours, Elena said finally. "And if we can't destroy the weapon in that time, Kronos will begin implementing his purification protocol." "That's our assessment," Catherine confirmed. "Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to propose a coordinated assault on the construction platform. If we can concentrate our forces." "It would be suicide," Joseph interrupted. "Kronos has the platform surrounded by defensive installations and at least 15 battle groups. We'd be walking into a meat grinder." "Then what do you suggest?" Elena asked. Joseph was quiet for a moment, studying the tactical displays. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of difficult decision. "We evacuate the outer rim." Catherine stared at him in shock. "Joseph, there are trillions of beings on those worlds. And if we try to defend them, they'll all die anyway when Kronos gets his weapon operational," Joseph replied. "But if we can evacuate the key populations, scientists, engineers, cultural leaders, genetic diversity samples, we might be able to preserve something to rebuild from." "You're talking about abandoning half the galaxy," Elena said. "I'm talking about saving what we can from an impossible situation," Joseph countered. "Kronos wants to destroy the outer rim worlds anyway. If they're empty when he fires his weapon, he achieves nothing except wasting ammunition." Catherine looked at the strategic display, trying to calculate the logistics of Joseph's proposal. The transportation requirements alone would be staggering. We'd need thousands of ships, coordination across hundreds of systems. "We have thousands of ships," Kane pointed out. "Civilian vessels, cargo haulers, passenger liners. Most of them are sitting in spaceports because normal commerce is shut down due to the Civil War." Elena was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing the terrible options before them. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with the burden of command. "How long would a full evacuation take?" "Impossible to say without detailed planning," Joseph admitted. "But we could start with the most vulnerable worlds, small populations, strategic importance, cultural significance. Work our way up to the larger colonies. And meanwhile, we continue looking for a way to neutralize the Omega cannon," Catherine added. Elena nodded slowly. "Very well. Admiral Harrison, you'll coordinate the military aspects of the evacuation. General McLean, I want you to work with the civilian authorities to identify priority populations and evacuation sites. Commander Kane, continue your intelligence operations. I want to know everything about that weapon and any possible weaknesses." "Ma'am," Catherine said, "what about the worlds that refuse to evacuate?" "A lot of the outer rim colonies are pretty independent-minded." "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Elena replied. "Right now, let's focus on saving the people who want to be saved." As the meeting broke up and the various officers began implementing their assignments, Catherine found herself alone with Joseph in the war room. "You know this is just delaying the inevitable," she said quietly. "Maybe," Joseph replied. "But it's buying us time. And time is the one thing we need most right now." Catherine looked at the tactical display showing Kronos' forces positioned around the Omega cannon. Joseph, what if we're wrong? What if there is a way to destroy that weapon? Then we'd better find it in the next 72 hours, Joseph said grimly. Because after that, it's going to be too late for clever tactics. Over the next day, the Loyalist fleet began the largest evacuation operation in galactic history. Cargo ships, passenger liners, and even military transports converged on the Outer Rim worlds, loading refugees and critical personnel for transport to safer territories. But as Catherine watched the operation unfold, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were simply rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. The Omega cannon represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power, and all the evacuation ships in the galaxy wouldn't change that basic fact. What they needed was a miracle. And Catherine had a growing suspicion that miracles were in short supply. Chapter 5, The Countdown Begins. The war room aboard the Indomitable had become the nerve center of the largest refugee operation in galactic history. Holographic displays showed the movement of thousands of ships as the Loyalist fleet worked desperately to evacuate the Outer Rim worlds before Kronos' weapon became operational. General McLean stood before the central display, coordinating evacuation priorities with a collection of civilian officials, military commanders, and planetary governors who had joined the resistance. The scale of the operation was staggering: hundreds of worlds, trillions of beings, all needing to be moved to safety in less than 60 hours. Status report on the Kepler sector, Joseph called out to his staff. Evacuation 60% complete, Commander Williams replied. But we're running into resistance from the colonial authorities on Kepler 4. They're refusing to abandon their cities. Joseph sighed. This was the third world today that had refused evacuation orders. He understood the sentiment. Asking people to abandon everything they had built was an almost impossible request. But the alternative was extinction. Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Chen called from the communications station, incoming transmission from Kepler 4. Governor Morrison wants to speak with you directly. The main screen flickered to life, revealing a middle-aged woman with steel-gray hair and the weathered features of someone who had spent decades fighting to build a civilization on a hostile frontier world. General McLean, Governor Morrison said, her voice carrying the distinctive accent of the Outer Rim colonies, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but my people didn't spend 40 years building New Geneva just to run away at the first sign of trouble. Governor, Joseph replied patiently, this isn't the first sign of trouble. This is the sign that trouble has evolved beyond our ability to fight it conventionally. Kronos has a weapon that can destroy your entire world in a single shot. So you say. But we've heard threats before. The Syndicate said they'd burn us out. The Zealots promised to purify our world with holy fire. We're still here. Joseph could see the determination in Morrison's eyes, and he respected it. The Outer Rim colonists were some of the toughest people in the galaxy, forged by decades of hardship and self-reliance. But toughness wouldn't stop a planet-killing superweapon. Governor, I understand your reluctance. Do you? Morrison interrupted. Have you ever spent your entire life building something, only to be told to walk away from it? New Geneva isn't just a city, General. It's 40 years of dreams, of sweat, of people who died to make it real. And it can be rebuilt, Joseph said. But only if the people who built it survive to do the rebuilding. Morrison was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with the decision. Behind her, Joseph could see other colonial officials, their faces reflecting the same mixture of fear and stubborn pride. How do we know you're not just running scared? Morrison asked finally. How do we know the super weapon even exists? Joseph gestured to Chen, who activated a secondary display showing the intelligence footage they had gathered during Kane's mission. The Omega cannon construction platform appeared in all its terrifying detail, a kilometer-long barrel surrounded by power systems that dwarfed most space stations. This footage was taken 18 hours ago, Joseph said. Our technical analysis indicates the weapon will be operational within 48 hours. When it is, Admiral Kronos plans to demonstrate its power by destroying several Outer Rim worlds. Morrison stared at the footage in horrified fascination. My God. That thing could actually destroy your world completely, Joseph confirmed. there would be nothing left but cosmic dust. The governor's resolve seemed to crumble as the reality of the situation hit her. How long do we have? We can have evacuation ships at Kepler-4 within 6 hours. Full population transfer would take approximately 12 hours if your people cooperate. Morrison nodded slowly. All right, General. We'll start preparation procedures immediately. But I want your word that we'll be brought back when this is over. You have it, Joseph promised, hoping it was a promise he could keep. As the transmission ended, Joseph felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Another world saved, but at the cost of everything the colonists had built. He wondered how many similar conversations would take place over the next 2 days. Sir, Chen called out, priority transmission from Commander Kane. Kane's image appeared on the communication screen, and Joseph could see immediately that the Special Operations Officer had news. His expression carried the weight of significant intelligence. General, we've completed our analysis of the Omega Cannon's defensive systems. I have good news and bad news. Bad news first, Joseph replied. The weapon is more heavily defended than we initially believed. Kronos has positioned 24 battle groups around the construction platform, plus automated defense satellites, plasma cannons, and a particle shield that could stop a Nova-class warhead. Joseph felt his hopes sink. And the good news? The power system has a critical vulnerability. Remember how I mentioned that the quantum tap has to be recalibrated after every shot? Well, during the recalibration process, the entire power grid is exposed. All the defensive systems go offline for approximately 30 minutes. Joseph frowned. But that would only help us if Kronos fires the weapon first. Exactly. Which brings me to the interesting part of our intelligence. According to the technical specifications Chen obtained, Kronos is planning a test firing in 36 hours. A demonstration shot aimed at an uninhabited system to show the galaxy what the weapon can do. Joseph's mind raced through the tactical implications. A test shot would leave the weapon vulnerable for 30 minutes. If we could time an assault, it would still be suicide, Admiral Harrison's voice said from behind him. Catherine had entered the war room while he was focused on Kane's transmission. Even with the defensive systems offline, we'd have to get through 24 battle groups. Not necessarily, Kane replied. What if the battle groups weren't there? Catherine raised an eyebrow. Explain. Kronos is planning more than just a test firing. According to our intelligence, he's also planning a series of demonstration bombardments, show trials where he destroys outer rim worlds that have refused to surrender. The battle groups would be deployed to those target systems to prevent evacuation attempts. Joseph felt a chill as he realized the implications. He's going to spread his forces thin to maximize the psychological impact. Exactly. Multiple simultaneous demonstrations, each protected by a smaller force. Classic divide-and-conquer strategy, except in reverse, he's dividing his own forces to conquer multiple targets. Catherine studied the tactical possibilities. If we could coordinate our attack to coincide with his demonstration strikes, we'd face maybe 6 battle groups instead of 24, Kane confirmed. Still overwhelming odds, but at least within the realm of possibility. Joseph looked at the strategic display, calculating distances and timing requirements. It would require perfect coordination. Multiple fleet actions occurring simultaneously across dozens of star systems. And it would mean sacrificing some of the worlds we can't evacuate in time, Catherine added grimly. The war room fell silent as everyone contemplated the terrible mathematics of Kane's proposal. They could potentially destroy the Omega Cannon, but only by allowing Kronos to demonstrate its power on populated worlds. How many casualties are we talking about? Joseph asked finally. Kane consulted his data pad. Depends on how successful the evacuation efforts are. Conservative estimate, 50 million beings on the worlds we can't evacuate completely. And if we don't destroy the weapon? Kronos has identified 400 target worlds for his purification protocol. Total population approximately 800 billion beings. Joseph closed his eyes, trying to process the magnitude of the choice before them. 50 million lives against 800 billion. It wasn't really a choice at all, but that didn't make it any easier. There's something else, Kane continued. The test firing Kronos is planning? The target is the Vega system. Uninhabited, but it contains the largest collection of pre-contact archaeological sites in the galaxy. Joseph felt his anger flare. The Vega system contained ruins from dozens of ancient civilizations, irreplaceable artifacts that told the story of galactic evolution over millions of years. Destroying them would be an act of cultural vandalism beyond imagination. Ma'am, Joseph said to Catherine, I recommend we proceed with Kane's plan. The risks are enormous, but it's our only chance to stop this madness. Catherine nodded slowly. Agreed. But we'll need acting Emperor Vasquez's authorization for something this ambitious. Elena's image appeared on the communications screen within minutes, transmitted from her temporary headquarters aboard the cruiser Defiant. She looked exhausted. The strain of commanding a galaxy-wide resistance operation was clearly taking its toll. Admiral, General, Elena said, I understand you have a proposal for dealing with the Omega cannon. Catherine quickly outlined Kane's plan, including the terrible cost and lives that it would require. Elena listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. 50 million casualties, Elena said finally. 50 million people who are counting on us to protect them. Ma'am, Joseph said quietly, if we don't try this, the casualties will number in the hundreds of billions. Sometimes command requires choosing between bad options and worse ones. Elena was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the decision. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Proceed with the operation. But I want every possible evacuation effort made for the target worlds. If we're going to sacrifice those people, I want to minimize the number we sacrifice. Understood, ma'am, Catherine replied. What about the fleet coordination? This operation will require forces from every loyalist battle group. You'll have them, Elena promised. I'll send the authorization codes within the hour. And Admiral? General? Make sure this works. We won't get a second chance. As Elena's image faded from the screen, Joseph felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. In 36 hours, he would lead the most desperate military operation in galactic history, an assault on the most heavily defended target in known space, with the fate of half the galaxy hanging in the balance. All right, people, Joseph called out to his staff, we have 36 hours to coordinate the largest simultaneous fleet action in Imperial history. Let's get to work. As the war room exploded into activity, Joseph took one last look at the strategic display showing Kronos' forces positioned around the Omega cannon. Somewhere in that maze of steel and hatred was the power to reshape the galaxy. And in 36 hours, they would either destroy it or die trying. The countdown had begun. Chapter 6, The Final Gambit. 24 hours before the scheduled assault on the Omega cannon, General McLean found himself in the Indomitable's observation deck, staring out at the largest fleet assembly in Imperial history. 600 ships from 17 different battle groups, all converging on coordinates that would put them within striking distance of Kronos' superweapon. Sir, Lieutenant Commander Chen said, appearing at his elbow with a data pad, final coordination reports from the fleet commanders. Joseph accepted the pad and scrolled through the tactical summaries. Every captain, every admiral, every ship's crew understood the stakes. This wasn't just another military operation, it was quite possibly the last free action the Republic would ever take. Status on the evacuation efforts? 93% complete, Chen replied. We've managed to evacuate all but 12 worlds in the target zones. Unfortunately, those 12 include some of the most populous colonies in the Outer Rim. Joseph felt the familiar weight of command decisions that involved civilian casualties. The 12 worlds that couldn't be evacuated contained roughly 30 million beings, men, women, children, entire families who had refused to abandon their homes or simply couldn't be reached in time. Any word from Kepler-4? Joseph asked. Governor Morrison and her people completed evacuation 6 hours ago. The last transport cleared the system just before Kronos' advanced scouts arrived. Joseph felt a small measure of relief. At least one world would be empty when Kronos fired his demonstration shots. But it was cold comfort when weighed against the millions who would die to provide the cover for their attack. "Sir," the ship's communications officer called from the bridge, "incoming transmission from Commander Kane. Priority channel." Kane's image appeared on the observation deck's communications screen, transmitted from his position aboard the stealth ship Ghost Protocol. The Special Operations Commander looked tired but determined, his face streaked with grease and sweat from preparations for the mission ahead. "General," Kane said, "we're in position at the target coordinates. The Omega cannon is magnificent and terrifying. I've never seen anything like it." "What's the tactical situation?" "Exactly as predicted. 24 battle groups on station, plus the automated defenses. The construction platform is essentially a fortress floating in space. But there's something else you need to know." Kane paused, and Joseph could see the concern in his eyes. "The weapon is ahead of schedule. Kronos moved up the test firing by 6 hours. He's planning to demonstrate the cannon in 18 hours, not 24. Joseph felt his blood turn to ice. 18 hours? Our fleet won't be in position for another 20 hours. "I know. Which means we need to delay his test somehow, or adjust our timeline." Joseph studied the tactical display, running calculations in his head. Adjusting their timeline would mean sending the fleet into battle before optimal positioning was achieved. The odds, already terrible, would become even worse. "What about delaying the test?" Joseph asked. "Can your team sabotage the weapon?" "Negative. The security is too tight, and any sabotage attempt would just result in my team getting killed without accomplishing the mission." Joseph was quiet for a moment, considering their options. None of them were good. "Kane, what if we split the mission? Part of the fleet moves ahead to intercept Kronos' demonstration forces, while the main assault group continues on the original timeline? You'd be dividing your already inferior forces," Kane pointed out. "It would be suicide." "So is letting Kronos complete his demonstration uncontested," Joseph replied. "If he successfully destroys multiple worlds with the Omega cannon, the psychological impact will be devastating. Half the remaining outer rim systems will surrender without a fight." Kane nodded grimly. "Understood. What are your orders?" Joseph looked out at the fleet assembled around the Indomitable, hundreds of ships, thousands of crew members, all volunteers who had chosen to risk everything for the chance to stop a madman. How many of them would die in the next 24 hours? Continue with the primary mission, Joseph decided. "But I'm taking a strike force to intercept the demonstration at Vega. Even if we can't stop the test firing, we can prevent Kronos from using it as a propaganda victory." "Sir," Chen said quietly, "that's suicide. You'd be facing 6 battle groups with maybe 50 ships." "Probably," Joseph agreed. "But sometimes the greatest victories come from the most desperate actions." He activated the ship's general communications system, his voice carrying to every vessel in the fleet. "All ships, this is General McLean. You've all been briefed on our mission, and you all understand the stakes. What you may not know is that our timeline has been accelerated. Admiral Kronos intends to demonstrate his super weapon in 18 hours, 6 hours ahead of schedule." Joseph paused, giving his words time to sink in. "This changes our tactical situation, but not our fundamental objective. The main fleet will continue to the primary target under Admiral Harrison's command. I will be taking a volunteer strike force to intercept Kronos' demonstration at the Vega system." The communications board lit up immediately as ship captains volunteered for what everyone understood to be a suicide mission. Joseph felt a surge of pride and sadness, pride in the courage of the people under his command, sadness at how many of them were about to die. "The volunteer ships will rendezvous with the Indomitable in 1 hour, Joseph continued. "All other vessels will proceed to the primary target under Admiral Harrison's command. Whatever happens in the next day, remember that you are fighting for the freedom of every being in the galaxy. Make it count." As the fleet began to reorganize itself, Joseph found Admiral Harrison waiting for him in the war room. "Joseph," Catherine said quietly, "you don't have to do this. The demonstration at Vega is secondary to the main objective." "Is it?" Joseph replied. "If Kronos successfully destroys the Vega system in front of the entire galaxy, it will prove that his weapon works as advertised. The psychological impact could end the war before we even reach the primary target." Catherine studied the tactical display showing both mission objectives. "You're right, but that doesn't change the fact that you're taking 50 ships against 6 battle groups. The odds have been against us since this started," Joseph interrupted. "But we've gotten this far by taking calculated risks. This is just one more." Catherine was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But I want Kane's team reassigned to the primary target. If you're going to sacrifice yourself at Vega, at least give the main assault the best possible chance of success." Joseph considered the reallocation, then shook his head. "Kane stays with me. His intelligence on the Omega Cannon's defensive systems is too valuable to risk on a secondary mission." "Joseph." "That's an order, Admiral. Kane comes with me, and you concentrate on destroying that weapon. The Republic is counting on you." Catherine saluted formally. "Understood, sir." "For the Republic." "For the Republic," Joseph replied. 6 hours later, Joseph stood on the bridge of the Indomitable as his strike force of 67 volunteer ships approached the Vega system. Sensors showed Kronos' demonstration fleet already in position, 6 battle groups arranged in a defensive formation around the archaeological worlds. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "enemy fleet composition, 2 heavy cruisers, 8 battle cruisers, 15 destroyers, and approximately 30 support vessels. They outgun us 3-1. Joseph studied the tactical display, looking for weaknesses in Kronos' formation. The Admiral had positioned his ships to maximize their defensive firepower while maintaining a clear firing line for the Omega Cannon's test shot. "Ma'am," the communications officer announced, "incoming transmission from the enemy flagship. Admiral Kronos wants to speak with you." On screen, Joseph replied. Kronos' image appeared on the main display, transmitted from the bridge of his command ship. The Admiral looked confident and relaxed, as if he were about to attend a social function rather than demonstrate a weapon of mass destruction. "General McLean," Kronos said, his voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "I have to admit, I didn't expect you to show up here personally. This is either very brave or very foolish." "A little of both," Joseph replied. "Just like this entire war." "War?" Kronos smiled coldly. "General, this stopped being a war the moment I completed the Omega Cannon. What you're witnessing today is the birth of a new galactic order. What I'm witnessing is a madman about to commit genocide on a scale that would make the ancient tyrants weep with envy." Kronos' expression darkened. "Those ancient tyrants understood something you've forgotten, General. Peace is not the natural state of civilization. Order requires strength, and strength requires that the weak be culled from the herd. The only thing that needs to be culled from this galaxy is your twisted philosophy," Joseph replied. "How eloquent. But ultimately irrelevant." Kronos gestured to something off-screen, and Joseph could see the massive form of the Omega Cannon moving into firing position in the distance. "In 30 minutes, I will demonstrate the power of evolution. The Vega system will be reduced to cosmic dust, and with it, millions of years of archaeological history." "You're destroying irreplaceable artifacts," Joseph said. "The ruins in that system tell the story of galactic civilization. They belong to all of us." "They belong to the past," Kronos corrected. "And the past is precisely what I'm trying to leave behind. General, I'll offer you one final chance. Surrender your fleet, and I'll ensure your crews are treated according to the laws of war." "Counteroffer," Joseph replied. "Surrender your fleet, and I'll ensure you receive a fair trial before we execute you for crimes against sentient life." Kronos laughed, a sound that carried no humor, only cold amusement. "Very well, General. You've chosen martyrdom over pragmatism. I respect that, even if I don't understand it. The transmission ended, leaving Joseph alone with his final tactical preparations. Around him, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of professionals who understood they were probably going to die in the next hour. "Sir," Commander Kane's voice came through the communications system from his position aboard the Ghost Protocol. "Final intelligence update. The Omega cannon will fire in 27 minutes. Defensive systems will go offline for 30 minutes beginning approximately 2 minutes after the shot." "Copy that, Kane. Are you in position for the secondary objective?" "Affirmative. If the primary assault fails, we'll attempt to board the construction platform during the vulnerability window." Joseph nodded, though Kane couldn't see him. The secondary objective was even more desperate than the primary assault, a single stealth ship attempting to infiltrate the most heavily defended installation in the galaxy. But if Joseph's strike force failed to stop the demonstration, it might be their only remaining option. "All ships," Joseph broadcast to his small fleet, "prepare for attack formation. We're going to hit them hard and fast, maximum aggression. Remember, our objective isn't to win, it's to prevent Kronos from using this demonstration as a propaganda victory." The volunteer ships began moving into attack formation, their hulls gleaming in the light of Vega's ancient star. Joseph felt a surge of pride as he watched them maneuver, captains and crews who had volunteered for certain death because they believed in something greater than themselves. "Sir," the tactical officer announced, "enemy fleet is moving to intercept. They're not waiting for us to close the distance." Joseph wasn't surprised. Kronos wanted to eliminate the threat to his demonstration before the Omega cannon fired. That was fine with Joseph, it meant the battle would be decided quickly, one way or another. "All ships, engage at will. Show them what free beings can accomplish when they fight for something they believe in." The battle erupted across the Vega system as two fleets clashed in the shadow of the galaxy's ultimate weapon. Joseph watched the tactical display as his 67 ships threw themselves against Kronos' superior force with the desperate courage of the outnumbered. The Indomitable shook under enemy fire as plasma bolts and missile salvos lit up the space around them. Joseph's ship was heavily outnumbered, but his crews were fighting with the fury of people defending their homes, their families, their very way of life. "Direct hit on enemy battlecruiser domination," the tactical officer reported. "She's vending atmosphere." "Good. Target the heavy cruiser Iron Fist. All weapons, continuous fire." The space battle raged for 20 minutes, with losses mounting on both sides. Joseph's force was being systematically destroyed, but they were taking a terrible toll on Kronos' demonstration fleet. More importantly, they were forcing the enemy to fight instead of simply observing the Omega cannon's test firing. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "transmission from Kane. The Omega cannon is powering up for the test shot." Joseph looked at the tactical display, calculating distances and timing. "Time to target?" 3 minutes, sir." Joseph made a decision that he knew would probably cost him his life. "All remaining ships, concentrate fire on the Omega cannon itself. Everything we have." "Sir," the tactical officer said, "our weapons won't be effective against the cannon's armor." "Maybe not," Joseph replied, "but we're not trying to destroy it. We're trying to disrupt the test firing." It was a desperate gamble. The Omega cannon was heavily armored and defended, but it was also a precision instrument. If Joseph's ships could damage the targeting systems or disrupt the power flow at the critical moment. The remaining ships of Joseph's strike force turned toward the superweapon, their guns blazing as they closed the distance. Enemy fire intensified as Kronos' defenders realized what Joseph was attempting. "The Defiant is breaking up," the tactical officer reported. "The Victory has lost main power." Joseph watched his small fleet die around him, but they were getting closer to the Omega cannon. Close enough to see the massive weapons targeting arrays swiveling to track the doomed archaeological worlds of Vega. "Sir," Kane's voice crackled through the communications system, "power build-up in the cannon's primary systems. Firing sequence initiated. All ships," Joseph broadcast on all frequencies, including the ones monitored by Kronos' forces, this is General Joseph McClane of the Galactic Republic. If this is the end, let it be recorded that we died fighting tyranny and madness. The Republic will survive, even if we do not. The Omega cannon fired. Joseph watched in horrible fascination as a beam of energy that contained the destructive power of a stellar core reached across space and struck the innermost world of the Vega system. The planet simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, an ancient world covered with ruins that told the story of dozens of extinct civilizations. The next moment, there was nothing but expanding gas and debris. "My God," someone whispered on the bridge. Joseph felt sick as he watched the destruction of irreplaceable history. But even in his horror, he noticed something important: the shot had missed its intended target. The beam had struck Vega 3 instead of Vega 4, which contained the most significant archaeological sites. "Kane," Joseph called over the communications system, "did you see that?" "Affirmative." The targeting was off by approximately 2 million kilometers. Our attack disrupted their firing solution. It wasn't much of a victory. One world had been destroyed when it should have been another. But it meant that Kronos' demonstration wasn't the complete success he had planned. The most important archaeological sites in the system were still intact. "Sir," the tactical officer announced, "the Omega cannon's defensive systems are going offline. Recalibration sequence has begun." Joseph looked at what remained of his strike force. 7 ships, all heavily damaged, facing an enemy fleet that still outnumbered them 6-1. But they had accomplished their primary objective. They had prevented Kronos' demonstration from being the overwhelming propaganda victory he had planned. "Kane," Joseph said, "the secondary mission is yours. Get to that cannon and find a way to disable it permanently." "Sir, what about extraction?" Joseph looked around the bridge of the Indomitable, taking in the faces of the crew members who had followed him into this desperate battle. They all knew there would be no extraction. "There is no extraction, Commander. Complete the mission." As Kane's stealth ship moved toward the Omega cannon under cover of the battle, Joseph prepared for the final phase of his mission. They had shown the galaxy that the super weapon could be challenged, that Kronos' new order was not inevitable. Now it was up to Admiral Harrison and the main fleet to finish what they had started. "All remaining ships," Joseph broadcast, "we've done what we came here to do. Now let's make sure we're remembered." The 7 surviving ships of Joseph's strike force turned toward Kronos' demonstration fleet for one last charge. They would all die in the next few minutes, but they would die as free beings defending the principles they believed in. It was, Joseph reflected as enemy fire began to tear his ship apart, not a bad way to go. Epilogue: The Price of Freedom. 6 months after the Battle of Vega, Admiral Catherine Harrison stood in the rebuilt Senate chamber on Celestia Prime, watching delegates from across the galaxy take their seats for the first democratic session since Kronos' coup. The chamber had been reconstructed exactly as it was before the massacre, down to the smallest architectural detail, a symbolic statement that democracy could not be destroyed by tyrants. But Catherine knew the true cost of that symbolism. The final assault on the Omega cannon had succeeded, but at a price that still haunted her dreams. Joseph McClane's sacrifice at Vega had saved the most important archaeological sites and disrupted Kronos' propaganda campaign, but the main battle had been even more brutal. 27 hours after Joseph's last transmission, Catherine's fleet had reached the construction platform just as Kane's team disabled the weapons power systems from within. The battle that followed had lasted 8 hours and resulted in the complete destruction of the Omega cannon, but at the cost of nearly 60% of the Loyalist fleet. Joseph McClane was posthumously awarded the Republic's highest honor, along with the 40,000 other crew members who had died in the final assault. Kane had survived, though barely, and was currently recovering from wounds that would probably keep him in medical care for another year. "Admiral," a familiar voice said behind her. Catherine turned to see Elena Vasquez approaching, wearing the formal robes of the newly elected emperor. The election had been held just 2 weeks ago, with Elena winning by the largest margin in imperial history. It seemed that surviving a coup and leading a successful resistance movement was excellent preparation for democratic politics. "Your Majesty," Catherine said formally, then smiled. Though I suppose I should get used to calling you that. In formal settings, yes, Elena replied. But we've been through too much together for excessive formality. How are you holding up? Catherine considered the question. How is she holding up? She had commanded the largest fleet action in galactic history, watched thousands of good people die, and somehow managed to save half the galaxy from genocide. The nightmares were manageable, and she could still function professionally. All things considered, she supposed she was doing reasonably well. I'm fine, Catherine said. Tired, but fine. What about you? Ready to govern a galaxy? As ready as anyone can be, I suppose. The reconstruction efforts are going well. We've managed to resettle most of the refugees from the evacuation, and the Outer Rim worlds are rebuilding faster than expected. Catherine nodded. The evacuation operation had been one of the few complete successes of the war. Despite the desperate timeline, they had managed to save over 95% of the targeted populations, relocating them to worlds in the inner systems where they could rebuild their lives. What about Kronos? Catherine asked. Elena's expression darkened. Still alive, unfortunately. He's being held at the maximum security facility on Tartarus Prime, awaiting trial. The legal proceedings are complicated. Catherine understood the complication. Kronos had committed crimes against sentient life on an unprecedented scale, but he was also a former Imperial admiral with significant support among certain segments of the military and civilian population. His trial would be watched by the entire galaxy, and its outcome would help determine whether the New Republic could truly put the dark days of the coup behind it. Any word on his supporters? Most of the military officers who sided with him have been granted amnesty in exchange for full cooperation with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The civilian collaborators are being handled on a case-by-case basis. Elena paused, looking around the rebuilt Senate chamber. We're trying to balance justice with healing. It's not easy. No, Catherine agreed. But it's necessary. Joseph always said that the strength of the Republic lay not in its ability to fight wars, but in its ability to make peace. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in memories of the man who had sacrificed everything to save the galaxy from tyranny. Joseph McLean had become a symbol of the resistance, his name spoken with reverence throughout the Outer Rim worlds he had died to protect. Catherine, Elena said finally, I have a proposal for you. Oh? The Senate is creating a new position, Supreme Admiral of Republican Forces. Someone to oversee the reconstruction of the Imperial Navy and ensure that what happened with Kronos never happens again. I'd like you to consider taking the job. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, considering the offer. It would mean responsibility for the largest military force in galactic history, the power to shape the future of interstellar warfare, and the burden of preventing another coup like Kronos's. The Imperial Navy is broken, Catherine said finally. Half the ships were destroyed in the Civil War, morale is at an all-time low, and nobody trusts anybody anymore. It would take decades to rebuild it properly. Which is exactly why we need someone like you in charge, Elena replied. Someone who fought for the Republic when it mattered most, someone the fleet can trust. Catherine looked out through the chamber's great dome at the construction ships working to repair the orbital defenses around Celestia Prime. The galaxy was healing, slowly but surely, from the wounds inflicted by Kronos' mad ambition. But the scars would remain for generations. All right, Catherine said. I'll take the job. But I have conditions. Name them. First, complete transparency in all military operations. No more secret weapons projects, no more hidden agendas. If we're building something that could threaten civilian populations, the Senate has a right to know about it. Elena nodded. Agreed. Second, mandatory psychological evaluations for all flag officers. What happened with Kronos should never happen again, and that means screening for the kind of megalomaniacal tendencies that led to the coup. Also agreed. What else? Third, I want a monument built to honor all the people who died fighting Kronos' regime. Not just the military personnel, but the civilians, the evacuees, everyone who suffered because one man decided he had the right to reshape the galaxy according to his vision. Elena smiled. I think that can be arranged. In fact, I think Joseph would have liked that. As if summoned by his name, Commander David Kane appeared at the entrance to the chamber, walking carefully with the aid of a mobility support system. His recovery from the wounds suffered during the assault on the Omega cannon had been remarkable, but he would never be the same physically. Admiral Harrison, Your Majesty, Kane said, approaching them with the careful gait of someone still learning to trust artificial limbs. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Commander, Elena replied. How are you feeling? Like I've been torn apart and put back together by medical technicians with a sense of humor, Kane replied wryly. But I'm alive, which is more than I expected 6 months ago. Catherine studied the Special Operations Officer, noting the subtle signs of ongoing pain that he was trying to hide. Kane had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of the war, infiltrating the Omega cannon's control systems while under enemy fire. The success of that mission had made the weapon's destruction possible, but at enormous personal cost. Commander, Catherine said, Elena has just offered me the position of Supreme Admiral. I'm going to need a staff of people I can trust absolutely. Interested in a desk job? Kane laughed, a sound that carried genuine amusement despite his physical condition. Admiral, after what I've been through, a desk job sounds like paradise. When do I start? Tomorrow, if you're up for it. We have a galaxy to rebuild. As the three of them stood in the rebuilt Senate chamber, watching delegates from across the galaxy take their seats for the new session, Catherine felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The coup had failed. The tyrant had been defeated. The Omega cannon lay in ruins at the bottom of a gas giant's atmosphere, its threat to galactic civilization ended forever. And while the cost had been enormous, hundreds of thousands dead, entire worlds devastated, trust between species and systems shattered, the Republic had survived. More than survived, actually. The crisis had forced the galaxy to confront its own weaknesses and emerge stronger. The new constitution included safeguards against military coups, protections for minority species, and guarantees of democratic representation that went far beyond anything in the previous system. It would take generations to fully heal from Kronos' attempt to remake the galaxy in his image. But as Catherine watched the delegates begin their first session, debating issues of trade policy and colonial rights with the passionate intensity of beings who had nearly lost the right to debate anything, she knew that the sacrifice had been worth it. Joseph McClane had been right. The strength of the Republic lay not in its ability to fight wars, but in its ability to make peace. And as the galaxy began the long process of healing from its wounds, Catherine was determined to ensure that the peace would last. The age of tyrants was over. The age of democracy had begun anew. And in the rebuilt Senate chamber where democracy had once died in blood and fire, the sound of free beings governing themselves echoed through the halls like a promise that such darkness would never fall again. The last stand of the Galactic Republic had ended not in defeat, but in renewal. And across 10,000 worlds, beings looked up at the stars and knew that they were free.